Here we look at race and culture. Race is typically defined in terms of physical characteristics such as skin, color, facial features, hair type, which are common to an inbred, geographically isolated people. Whereas culture, two of the most challenging issues in diversity work are overcoming the idea that race is culture and overcoming racism itself. On this next slide, I have a short video by one of my colleagues, Dr. Wesley Waller. It's very entertaining, as you'll see, on schema, looking at Piaget's developmental stages for children as they grow up and they develop their schemas advance as they get older. I want you to view this from the viewpoint of racism and intercultural sensitivity, understanding when we demonstrate racism or prejudice, intercultural insensitivity, it's really the sign or an indicator of an underdeveloped schema when it comes to intercultural diversity. So I think you're going to enjoy this next clip. We'll come back and then wrap it up after you watch that video.
Well, hello, my friends. We are going to talk about the transition of a schema as one moves through life. And as you noted in some of our last lectures, a schema is nothing really but a cognitive filing cabinet by which someone may choose to classify interaction with their environment. In this particular case, we again have little Rusty, and here he is in his diaper. And he has the most important thing in life, schema. And this little schema, it has his most important thing, which in this particular case is a bottle. Now, do you think that as little Rusty goes through life, that his most important thing, schema, is still going to be classified and have a bottle in it? I don't really think so. Here we have young Rusty. And the most important thing that this little nerd has is this good-looking blonde that is in that. I fondly remember those days. I don't know if you ever heard the story about the old preacher that stood up and he told his congregation, I'm going to shout out a word. And when I do, you stand up and call out the song that comes to mind. And he said salvation. And somebody stood up and said amazing grace. And he talked about service, and somebody stood up and said, let's sing Only Trust Him. And then he cried out the word sex, and an old woman stood up and said precious memories. Okay, that's enough said with that, but it's really kind of cute, isn't it? Look at the transition in these two schemata. The first schema, most important when we have little Rusty, is this bottle. He lives for that bottle. And then here we have young Rusty, and of course he's interested in the opposite gender. Now, let's move on to middle Rusty. Oh, man, he likes that fast race car, doesn't he? I hate to tell you, I don't know. I couldn't figure out whether I'm in this one right here or in the next one. I certainly can be seen with that cup of coffee. And then we get to old Rusty, and what do you think that is up there? That, my friends, is a warm bedpan. Now, what Piaget observed is that as people go through life, schema undergo transitions. And it's not necessarily that one schema, the schema earlier one just vanishes. It is that it grows and it's enriched by the experiences of life. Now, it's very interesting here. Schema go through transitions. But so does an individual as they go through life in the manner in which they think. What Piaget really accomplished with this is that he said and indicates for us, or taught, implied, and I may be paraphrasing him, but that children are not just little adults. Children think differently than adults. Children are going through stages of interacting with their world, and the schemata which they develop become more and more complex, and the complexity of these schemata and the transition of these schemata mean that a person goes through stages naturally, stages of development. So in our next little exciting discussion, we're going to look at some of the stages that Piaget identified. And in this course, each of those stages will soon be a major module of study, which we will examine in detail. I might ought to let all of you vote as to where I am in this scale but I sure do like warm bedpans.
I hope you enjoyed that little presentation. As you can see, I mean, it would be very sad if we saw an adult walking around calling horses and cows and sheep still calling them dog. And a lot of times that's what we do with racism. It's a really an underdeveloped schema where we lump everybody into one group from a particular race or culture. And we see how stereotypes and generalizations come about. Stereotype is the practice of treating each person as an individual, is often a pitfall over diversity programs, as it imposes the Western idea of individualism in every instance. And we know that other cultures, especially in the East, view things more holistically rather than individualistic. Also, in generalizations, very close to stereotypes for trying to define the differences, but it's generally more beneficial to use accurate cultural generalizations, not to be confused with stereotypes. Generally speaking about a culture, you know, this culture tends to do things this way. Asian culture is more holistic, rather than saying an Asian culture in a derogatory stereotype idea. Or certain folks in the Middle East, certain populations there, being more in a tribal with a leader group and a leader of a group than referring to that in a derogatory term. These generalizations obviously refer to the tendencies, the predominant tendencies among cultural groups. You can tell by quantifiable research how that they have adapted to their situation and their living conditions, the way they farm possibly, or what they do for cultivating their crops or for harvesting animals and hunting and gathering, house construction, all those things that have adapted to the cultural climate and environment in which they find themselves. But another thing that is key to this understanding too is that remember that these are generalizations and tendencies, and not that everybody fits into the same mold. We can look at these generalizations are best applied in tentative hypotheses and really are subject to verification. But just remember once again about racism, it really is an indicator of an underdeveloped cultural diversity schema.